April 30th, 1945, deep beneath Berlin, Adolf Hitler makes his final move. What really happened in his last 48 hours? The once mighty Third Reich was now reduced to a few crumbling blocks in central Berlin. Soviet forces had encircled the city, pushing through streets littered with rubble and bodies. Explosions shook the ground above the Führer bunker as Red Army troops advanced, fighting block by block. Hitler, isolated and increasingly erratic, was given devastating news. Heinrich Himmler, one of his closest and most loyal officers, was secretly negotiating Germany's surrender to the Western Allies. Enraged by what he saw as betrayal, Hitler erupted in fury. His paranoia had already reached dangerous levels, and now, with the war effectively lost, he saw enemies everywhere. Trust was a rare commodity in the bunker, and as Hitler's inner circle shrank, so did any hope of survival. Hermann Fegelein, an SS officer and brother-in-law to Eva Braun, had been caught attempting to flee Berlin. He had discarded his Nazi uniform and was preparing to escape the impending Soviet takeover. To Hitler, this was an unforgivable act of treason. Brought before the Führer, Fegelein's pleas fell on deaf ears. Hitler, desperate to maintain control even in his final hours, ordered his immediate execution. Fegelein was shot in the garden outside the bunker, a grim reminder of Hitler's merciless rule, even as his empire crumbled. The execution did nothing to change the course of history, but it revealed Hitler's growing paranoia and his refusal to accept the inevitable. As the chaos outside grew, Hitler made a decision that surprised even those closest to him. He would marry Eva Braun. In the early hours of April 29th, deep within the confines of the bunker, a brief and somber wedding ceremony took place. There were no grand celebrations, only a handful of witnesses, including Joseph Goebbels. After signing their marriage certificate, Hitler and Braun hosted a small gathering. While the guests drank and tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, Hitler remained emotionless, detached from the moment. He then retreated to dictate his last political testament, blaming the Jews for Germany's downfall and expressing contempt for his betrayers. He made it clear he would not allow himself to be captured. By April 29th, the situation was irreversible. Hitler had accepted his fate. He had his final meal, a simple plate of pasta or possibly scrambled eggs, while finalizing instructions with his personal staff. He ordered that his body, along with Eva Braun's, be burned immediately after death to prevent it from being displayed by the Soviets. Those who saw him during these final moments noted his declining health. His hands trembled violently, a possible symptom of Parkinson's disease, and his once commanding presence had withered into that of a frail, broken man. His voice, once filled with rage and power, was now a whisper of its former self. Above the bunker, Berlin was unrecognizable. Soviet forces had pushed into the city center, engaging in brutal street-to-street combat. The sound of artillery and gunfire shook the bunker walls. Even the most loyal of Hitler's staff began discussing escape, but Hitler refused to consider it. He believed that fleeing was cowardice, and he had long claimed that he would rather die than be captured by the Soviets. With every passing hour, the net tightened around him. The once invincible leader of Nazi Germany was now trapped, both physically and mentally, in the underground corridors of his own making. As the morning of April 30th, 1945, dawned over a burning Berlin, Hitler's world had shrunk to the cold, dimly lit corridors of the Führer bunker. The once feared dictator, now a frail and broken man, prepared to meet his end. He called for his remaining staff, his secretary Traudl Junge, his valet Heinz Linger, and his military officers to bid them farewell. Some swore their loyalty to the bitter end, while others simply awaited their inevitable fate. His final military briefing was little more than a formality. The reality was clear. Berlin was lost. The Soviets had pushed into the city center. The German military was surrendering in droves, and the Reich was in ruins. There was no last-minute strategy, no final stroke of military genius. Hitler, his voice barely a whisper, dismissed his officers for the last time. He and Eva Braun then retreated to their private quarters, sealing themselves away from the crumbling world above. At around 3:30 p.m, the moment finally arrived. In their private room, Hitler and Eva Braun sat together for the last time. Braun, having refused to leave his side, had made her decision. She would die with her husband. She dressed in a blue silk dress and took a lethal dose of cyanide. Hitler, unwilling to risk a painful death, opted for his pistol. He placed the gun to his right temple and pulled the trigger. A gunshot echoed through the bunker. When Hitler's staff entered the room moments later, they found his lifeless body slumped on the sofa, blood pooling around him. Eva Braun lay beside him, untouched by gunfire, the cyanide having done its job. The scene was grim, yet expected. His orders were clear. No Soviet soldier would ever lay eyes on his corpse. Two of Hitler's most trusted aides, Otto Günsche and Heinz Linger, carried the bodies outside to the Reich Chancellery garden. As Soviet artillery pounded Berlin, they doused the bodies with gasoline and set them on fire. Flames consumed what remained of Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun, reducing them to ashes. The dictator who had plunged the world into chaos had met his fiery end in a shallow grave of his own making. As Soviet forces overran central Berlin, they quickly secured the Reich Chancellery and the bunker beneath it. In the days that followed, they discovered the charred remains buried in a shell crater. The bodies, though burned beyond recognition, were taken into Soviet custody. Stalin, suspicious and paranoid, ordered a thorough investigation. Yet for years, details of Hitler's death remained shrouded in secrecy, fueling speculation and myths. Despite the overwhelming evidence, theories of Hitler's survival emerged almost immediately. Some claimed he had fled to Argentina, aided by secret Nazi networks. Others speculated that he had escaped to a hidden base in Antarctica. The lack of a publicly displayed body only fueled these ideas, with Stalin himself at times suggesting that Hitler had eluded capture. However, forensic analysis of Hitler's dental records, confirmed by his personal dentist's assistant, proved that the remains found in the bunker were indeed his. Later studies on skull fragments stored by the Russians further solidified this claim, despite some controversy over their authenticity. Hitler's death marked the collapse of Nazi Germany. Within days, Berlin fell, and Germany officially surrendered on May 8, 1945. The war in Europe was over, but the mystery surrounding his final moments persists, leaving room for speculation and debate. So did Hitler really die in the bunker, or is there more to the story?